So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and I'm going to introduce my two colleagues, and after that I just kind of sit on the side and chime in the sidelines. And I'll tell you more about them in a few minutes. So first we'll go through a little bit of background on the history of the behavioral insights movement, and it'll be a very, very short history. But before I do that, some of you might have noticed that I'm teaching, in the first full week of January, I teach a J-term course on noticing. So you're going to get a 3-minute preview of that course, because I'm going to use that as a lead-in to what I see the behavioral insights movement being all about. All right. Now, this might seem more appropriate for George Fellows or for Rubinstein Fellows, but you're here, so I'm going to give you a problem anyhow. It look like a problem you want, but here it is, okay? And it's an investment problem, and you're an investment advisor, and you have a client who wants to invest a moderate chunk of money for a long-term investment, moderate risk preference, and you've narrowed the choices down to 4 funds, and everyone in this room is going to be required to make a recommendation of one of the 4 funds. Now you'll see there's 5 up there, but the blue one is the S&P 500 over the last 9 years. And some of you might even recommend an index fund, but here you can't, because that would be boring, and they came to you for good advice for doing something better than indexing their money. All right. So the 4 funds, the green fund is the tobacco, the letters didn't come out, sorry about that, but the green fund is called Tobacco Trade, primarily invests in tobacco. The rust-colored fund is called Alpha. The purple fund is Fortitude, and the yellow fund is Power Trade. Now I'm sure you'd like to know more before making an important recommendation, but unfortunately I'm not going to tell you anything more. And you only have like about another 35 seconds to think this through. So again, I'll remind you, the blue is not an option, but it's a benchmark. It's the S&P 500. It's the U.S. stock market. Green, Tobacco Trade. Rust, Alpha. Purple, Fortitude. And yellow, Power Trade. Everybody ready? Because voting's coming. Who's bold enough to go with Tobacco Trade in this group with a lot of doctors in the room? Nobody. Okay, how about that rust colored Alpha fund? Got a couple. 3? Okay. Fortitude? Pretty popular. And Power Trade. All right. So Fortitude won, and a couple of you were shrugging like, how am I supposed to know, but you said I have to vote, so I'll vote. All right. But Fortitude won. Now, Fortitude was a bigger winner last night, I'll tell you. So, but my next question to you is there anything wrong with one of these 4 funds? Yeah.
I think it depends. I think it depends on what's in them, and I think it depends on...
Based on what you can see right in front of you, is there anything wrong with one of these funds? Yeah.
Fortitude has no volatility whatsoever.
That's good, right? High returns, low volatility. Is that what you're saying? What was that?
It's almost impossible.
Almost impossible. Why are you hedging with almost?
Because there may be 1% of chance that something is going to
There's
grow
no percentage
over time.
chance. All of you invested in Fortitude. You lost all your clients' money. That was made off a Ponzi scheme. And what's intriguing is that when I show this to any audience, and that includes high-level people in the investment banking world, Fortitude's a runaway winner. Okay? The other interesting thing is, despite the fact that Fortitude's a runaway winner, when I ask the next question, what's wrong with one of these funds, there are people in the audience who are, there are more of you thinking it, a couple of you saying, Fortitude's not possible. Basically, a little bit of economics provides information to make the argument that it's totally impossible to dramatically outperform the market with no volatility. Okay. Now, we'll skip all the details for why that's the case because I only have 3 minutes. And some of you are going to say, but how was I supposed to know? What I want to emphasize is even with investment banking executives, even with people with MBAs, PhDs in relevant areas, when you ask what do you invest in, people look for high returns, low volatility. And their mind fades from the ethical question of is this possible or not. All right. So we kind of wandered onto this problem. And what I want to highlight is that there are lots of threats and challenges out there, and we often don't notice things that we should notice. Okay. Now, the last mentioned Marla. Marla notices everything, and without training, I notice nothing. Okay, I'm a really terrible noticer, so I've been on a 12-year self-recovery improvement effort, including writing a book last year called The Power of Noticing, and the course version of it is in the first week of January. So if you want to learn what I've learned over the last 12 years about how to notice better, come visit. But what I want to emphasize is that what we're going to be spending this evening about is noticing opportunities to fix things that aren't right. Okay? And we're going to be noticing the kinds of things that too often people just say that's the way the world works, that's the way our hospital works, that's the way the government works, when we should be noticing that there's something wrong there and we can go about fixing it. All right, so that's the noticing part. We're kind of done with that. I'm happy, by the way, at 8 o'clock, I have nowhere to go. I'm happy to talk forever about noticing. All right, so the field of behavioral insights, I kind of date it to Herb Simon in the 40s and 50s. A lot of you have heard the phrase bounded rationality. Simon won the Nobel Prize for the very simple idea that humans aren't fully rational like neoclassical economic models suggest, but there are a variety, we have a variety of cognitive limitations. And Kahneman and Tversky passed away, that's why many of you know Kahneman more than you know Tversky. But Kahneman and Tversky became the leaders of the field, telling us about the systematic, predictable ways in which humans are limited from acting rationally. So we started to catalog what these mistakes are. And a lot of you have heard about the framing effect and escalation of commitment, overconfidence. You'll be hearing about 7 in today's class. So that will be part of that. And the Robert Alister list will really come out of this tradition of identifying what are the systematic and predictable ways in which humans are limited. All right. Now, you're not really supposed to read this slide. This is just a prompt for me. But it mentions a paper by Fishoff in 1982. And what the main thing I want to emphasize here, now you're all trying to read it, but it's really not that interesting. But what was in this 1982 paper was a fascinating result. Because if you go back to the 70s, 80s, even 90s, those of us who were studying this area of systematic and predictable biases, we clearly did this with the general notion, if we can figure out what's wrong with your intuition, we can fix it. And what this 82 paper highlighted was that in fact we're getting pretty good at identifying what are the biases, and we don't have a clue about how to fix your intuition. And 30 years later, that's still the conclusion. We don't know how to fix intuition. We can get a short-term fix in the lab that lasts about a half hour, okay? But in terms of keeping you from being overconfident, telling you about it, that doesn't work. We don't have any training effort that's actually effective on a widespread basis on improving intuition, which is a little sad. Okay? But what Thaler and Sunstein did in their book Nudge was they basically suggested that if at first you don't succeed, try again, then quit, no use being a damn fool about it. And if we can't fix intuition, maybe there's something else we can do. And what they identify is what they describe as libertarian paternalism or choice architecture, or the word we most commonly hear is nudge. And the basic idea of nudge is if we understand how human beings work, then perhaps we can design our choices in ways that will increase the likelihood that people with their systematic and predictable biases will still get better results for themselves and better results for society on a more frequent basis. And this nudge movement is very connected to the Behavioral Insights Group, which you've heard about. You probably have received lots of emails from Kate Phillips and Abby Dalton about various Behavioral Insight Group and Behavioral Insight Study Group events. I'm happy to tell you more again at 8 o'clock if you're not getting those lists. But this went from an academic structure to this guy's David Halpern, who recently wrote a book called Inside the Nudge Unit. That's Owen Service is kind of number 2 within the UK Behavioral Insights team. And the Behavioral Insights team became the practitioner experts on how do you take the nudge framework and turn it into an actual practice to improve government. And they've now run over 200 field experiments on how to make government more effective. Okay? And in a bizarre set of events, last year David Cameron privatized the Behavioral Insight team. So it used to be an agency of government. It's now a for-profit corporation that's 1/3 owned by the British government. But that's kind of a side note. So this occurs in 2010. One of the interesting things that they did, because we have a lot of docs in the room who are working on really important things, the first project that they worked on was how to collect more taxes. Okay? And the reason I tell you something so boring is that it's useful to think about their first study in terms of creating change. So why do taxes first? And the simple answer is, after you collect an extra $100 million, it allows you more discretion to fix education, health, and lots of other things that you think are easy fix. So a very interesting strategic choice. And I think that I think it was easy pickings. I think that they thought that they were pretty confident that they could get a big success very easily. Okay. The tax letter, okay, was in 2010. And this is what the bit world looks like today. Okay. There are bit units showing up all around the world. None of them are even close to the Behavioral Insight team in the UK in terms of state of development. But we have more than a dozen countries that are developing bit units. We have the World Bank who's involved, the European Union, the OECD, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of activity going on, a lot of consulting firms trying to figure out what role they're going to play in all of this activity. Julia works for BCG. Yes, out of Dubai, and she's very much in this world from the consulting side. So lots of different activity, and the rest of this evening is going to be focused on health in ways that my 2 colleagues will tell you about. So Alister and Robert were both fellows in our programs as of a few months ago, and then they graduated. They're both terrific people. Alister is a doc. He's working in an emergency room currently. Robert is the creator of the Behavioral Insight Study Group. Just a few words on that. Iris Bonet and I, in 2012, were designing something called the Behavioral Insights Group. And the way I ended up as co-director of CPL is I had the idea that perhaps the Behavioral Insights Group should be part of CPL. Somehow that made me a candidate to replace David Gergen, and then David Gergen and I talked, and we liked each other, so we ended up as co-directors. But we started the Behavioral Insights Group in 2013, and it was really in the fall, about 6 months later, that Robert and a few others showed up and said, "What about us?" And we said, "Who?" And the answer was, "What about all the students who are interested in this stuff?" And Iris and I kind of said, "You're interested in this stuff?" So we clearly thought of this as a activity for geeks around here, and found that there was an enormous amount of student interest. And there's now 600 students who are part of the Behavioral Insight Study Group that Robert created, and Kate Phillips is the current lead on that. But the other fun part to tell you about the introduction which you've already had alluded to. I joined CPL April 1, 2013, and Barbara will remember this. And I was invited to a Wednesday night, okay, and I sort of was just meeting fellows for the first time, and they asked me my opinions on some things, and I told them my opinions. And my quick summary is, and they didn't like my opinions, and that wasn't the best start of connecting to the fellows. It happens. Okay. Does that sound fair, Barbara?
It sounds like you're on.
But it's April already, so then it's May, and then everybody goes away for the summer, right? So then the fall comes, and I've had people not like me before. It's okay. And so the fall comes, and we have the retreat at Cape Cod, and it was earlier in September than it was this year. And so we're at the Ocean's Edge Hotel, and on Friday night, there's a dinner reception, as you experienced. And after dinner, people the bar's open and people are having a drink or two. And Elsa from Hong Kong comes up to me. And Elsa is a forceful personality. And she walks up to me and she says, "So Max, are you drunk?" And I said, "No, Elsa, why do you ask?" She said, "You have a car?" I said, "Yep, I have a car." She said, "Thought so." She said, "So we have a problem here. There's a bunch of adults who are kind of stuck in the middle of Cape Cod, and we have no access to stuff that we want for entertaining ourselves this evening. So would you drive us down the road and then drive us back?" I said, "I can do this, Elsa." So the next thing I know is I get my car, and 5 fellows pile in, and that includes these 2 gentlemen. And we drive down the road, and I park the car, they go in, and this is alcohol wine like I've never seen before. The quantity and the low quality were And I drove the 5 of them and the very full back of the car, dropped them off, and they invited me in, and they said, "Oh, thank you, good night." And I went to sleep. This year, it seemed like people thought that there was an 82-year-old tradition that I had a liquor run. And what I want to do is convey it's these guys. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alister.
Thank you, guys. We want to be concise, and we want to give you guys tools for tonight to help you with your leadership journeys. We want to introduce you to Behavioral Insights, and most importantly, we want to get you on the boat cruise by 8 p.m. Okay, so we're gonna move through things today. All right. So as Max alluded to, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be back. Right. This fellowship for me in the 2 years that I was here through a very difficult time in my life, and this place, people like Max, people like Patty, people like Rob, Barbara, really held me through a very difficult set of circumstances in my life, and I came out stronger on the other end. And when I graduated, I feel like I graduated left with the wind at my back. And that will happen for all of you as well. You really leave this place feeling like you have the wind at your back. And you must remember that it's the relationships and it's the interactions that you have with each other. It's the real source of value and the real source of power in this fellowship. So today we want to begin a conversation about nudging, about behavioral insights. As Max alluded to, behavioral insights have been used the world over to solve problems in politics, in marketing and consumer behavior, in savings and financial loan decisions. And they've been effective, and these nudges, these interventions have been well validated and have been experimentally sound. The question, though, that Rob and I are trying to answer is, can behavioral insights be used in medicine? Can behavioral insights be used to help doctors make better decisions? Can behavioral insights be used to help patients make better decisions? can nudging work to keep a patient more sort of compliant with their exercise goals, with their dieting goals and regimens? Ultimately, we want to ask, will nudges work in medicine? Now, this is unclaimed territory so far. There have only been a couple of studies really where folks have tried to merge these two fields of behavioral science and medicine. But we think there's so much more work to be done. Now, tonight, to give you guys a 40,000-foot view, tonight's not just about medicine. Tonight's about teaching you these nudging tools and introducing you to these behavioral insights so that you can take these tools back to the spaces and places that you care about. Whether that's you, Anna, with your work with Serbia on the Move, can you take these behavioral insights and bring them back to help your constituents? Or whether that's you, Dina, taking these insights back to Sports for Sharing.
Yeah.
Right? And so bottom line, we want to equip you with these tools in your leadership toolkit so that you can take it back to the spaces and places that you care about. All right? So for many of you, tonight's going to be the beginning of this journey in behavioral insights. It might be the beginning, but Rob's going to tell you the beginning of our journey in behavioral insights.
And I want to echo what Alister said about just how awesome it is to be back here at the Dharman Room, and thank Max for inviting us and Barbara for hosting us. I also had a very difficult 2 years here at the Kennedy School, and this Dharman Room is my home in all of Boston, all of the East Coast, so it's just so exciting to be here. And so, as Alister said, I want to talk about the beginning of our journey together, which started at the Cape Cod retreat. Lucky for us, Tom Fitzsimmons was there to capture what might have been our first handshake. And so the day seemed fantastic. I met Alister, I learned about his interest in medicine. I had come to the Kennedy School to study behavioral insights, but was really without a clear direction of where I would go. And so the night went on. It was as great as anything I could possibly hope for. And then I went to bed. And when I woke up the next morning, things were very different. So, not in that way. No. So the next morning I woke up to someone banging on my door telling me that I needed to call my mother because there had been a family emergency. And this was at 6:15 a.m. So I called my mom and was told that my dad had died the night before of a sudden heart attack. And so that's when my CPL retreat ended. So I immediately flew home to Montana and spent the next 3 weeks grieving, adapting to this new world, and really trying to understand, like, how did this happen? How did this happen? I think that people suffer health problems who don't understand health or who don't have access to health resources, but my dad was a dentist, married to a pediatrician. Like, we had health knowledge in our home, we had access to health care, and I really, at that point, became committed to using behavioral insights to find a way to build a world where it's easier and more natural for people to live healthy, long lives. And so when I got back, I found a really fantastic thought partner in Alister. And our conversations really centered on how can behavioral insights be used to reduce obesity, how can behavioral insights be used to prevent heart attacks. And we quickly learned that we needed to, these big problems were something we could attack in the future, but we needed to find a problem of more manageable scale. And so that's when Alister told me about this. Maybe some of the physicians in the room know this problem, but the problem is that the best data says that physicians only wash their hands before seeing 48% of their patients. So it would not be altogether outrageous that if Max has the flu and shows up to an emergency, to a hospital, he gets proper treatment, and then I'm next in line for a sprained ankle, but I walk out of that hospital with the flu. And then we came across a study which happened in Copenhagen, where people set little footprint stickers on the street side leading up to garbage cans. And we heard that this resulted in a tremendous decrease in the amount of littering. And this excited Alister because he said that he spends a lot of his time walking from patient room to patient room, looking downward either at charts or just something in his hands, and thought, in the same way that these footprints on the floor increase the salience of a garbage can, maybe because he and other doctors spend so much time looking downward, if there was something on the floor that increased the salience of the hand sanitizer pump, maybe that would make a big dent in this physician hand hygiene, like poor compliance problem. So we got to work. We bought a bunch of hand sanitizer pumps. We bought a bunch of like sticky paper and cut out footprints. Alister became an electrical engineer and soldered this, it's called the event data logger, into the back of a hand sanitizer pump. And we showed up to MIT Medical. And we went and knocked on their door and told them that they have a problem, that their doctors don't wash their hands, and that we're a couple of smart guys who have the solution. And they immediately told us they don't have that problem, which was, of course, not true, but was an excellent lesson in just not showing up to a client's door unannounced and telling them they have a problem and that you're here to fix it. And so we decided we needed to run a proof of concept experiment in another context. And so that's what we did. We set these footprints in a grocery store from the entrance leading up to a hand sanitizer pump right here. And this is just a snapshot of what we saw. So this person walks by and doesn't use the hand sanitizer pump.
Fail.
People, you can't tell if he notices them or not, but
So there's a logger here that's tracking if this is used, and then we're broadcasting this video to ourselves to see what the denominator is, how many opportunities there are for an individual to actually use the pump.
so here we see.
There we go.
And there, so so on alternating days for 14 days in 3 grocery stores, we had those footprints there. And we were really excited about this because we found that the footprints increased hand sanitizer usage. They doubled or maybe even tripled the usage of hand sanitizer, which was exciting because 1, that's statistically significant, but 2, we think this effect size might be even bigger in a hospital or an emergency room where people actually have a high motivation to use a hand sanitizer pump. So now we are talking, we're in the introductory stages of talking with people at Massachusetts General Hospital about actually running this study in the hospital now that we have this proof of concept proven. But now I'll turn it over to Alister to talk about another study that we are hoping to run in a hospital.
So check it out, guys. So this is your first nudge in your nudge toolkit today. You're going to be given a problem in medicine that was sourced from the folks in this room here, from medicine and public health practitioners. And you'll be trying to solve that problem by putting together a couple of tools from this nudge toolkit and create a pilot intervention for the Surgeon General, who's asking you to solve one of his problems, and for President Obama, who's just newly created the nudge unit in the White House. Okay? So ultimately what we're going to do today is we're going to ask you guys to try to solve one of these problems, but we need to give you a frame of reference, a concrete example of how that can happen. So we're going to take you through our third study, and we're going to give that as an example for how you guys can approach it today with your nudge units together. So here's the third study. Now, the people in medicine know this very well. Medicine literally hinges upon patient compliance to medications, okay? And I was just as shocked as any other provider when I heard this fact here. For every 100 prescriptions that I write, only about 25 to 30% of those are taken properly, okay? This is the part of the problem that I care about in the emergency room. I think that for every prescription I write, an individual patient's going to go to the pharmacy and then fill that. And that's sort of my frame of reference, that, yeah, it's not that hard to go and fill out a prescription. There's a bunch of reasons why out of 100 prescriptions, only 50 to 70 of them are filled. Prohibitive costs, access to medications, patient literacy. But it also turns out that a lot of patients just fail to follow through because they forget, and because ultimately they've got a lot of different things going on. So the healthcare system has to figure out a way to help patients make these decisions. Okay? Now, if you think that this is a problem just out in the ether, let me tell you a story about a patient who I had just about 3 weeks ago. So we'll call her patient M. So about 3 weeks ago, I had a patient who came in with a huge abscess on her leg. Now, an abscess is a big, thick infection that goes deep into the skin. Okay? So I evaluated the abscess. I ended up cutting it open and debriding the material on the inside, taking all the stuff out, packing it, gave her antibiotics, and then gave her a prescription, told her how important it was that she kept taking this medication, because this medication needs to be in her bloodstream for 7 to 14 days for it to actually work and knock out the infection. And afterwards I said, so do you understand that you have to take this? She said, yeah, doc, I got it, doc. I said, okay. 3 days later, I come to the same emergency room. As I'm walking in, I see patient M sitting in a stretcher underneath the blanket in my emergency room. I walk up to her and I say, "What are you doing here?" She said, "Doc, it's back. I think it's worse." So I look at I take the blanket off and I look at the abscess, and indeed, it is back. And indeed, it is worse. So I ask her, "What happened to the antibiotics I gave you?" She says, "What antibiotics?" Right? And part of this is that we have to help our patients get to the pharmacy. Part of this is we have to support them through this process. And we don't put any thought into that right now in the way that we do things. Here's a potential solution. So we now know the problem very well. Here's a potential solution. This is a standard prototypical 2010 midterm election mailing that went out to all potential voters. This one happens to be from New Hampshire. Okay? In the middle of the screen, you'll see a nudge that Todd Rogers, a man right down the hall, a professor here, found to be supremely effective at getting voter turnout to increase. This is called an implementation intention. It's very small. I'll read it to you. He asks people these 3 questions, not with the idea that they'll respond, but that the idea that they'll think about the answers to these 3 questions. He'll ask, will you vote on election day? What time will you vote? Where will you be beforehand? And it turns out that by getting someone to think through the tiny micro behaviors and micro decisions that lead up to that future action, it turns out that you lower the barrier and actually get them to more easily do that behavior. Okay? And you increase the probability that they will follow through by that simple intervention. In the study that he did, this was in 2008, the presidential election, he had an N of 300,000. And he found that he could increase voter turnout by 4%. But there's another important, super powerful nudge that's on this piece of paper here. Can anybody pick it out? I know there's a lot going on here.
Thanks them for voting in 2008.
That's fantastic. That's a good one. So that's appealing to personal identity. There's another really powerful one here.
Thank you for the millions of Americans that will vote this year.
That's another good one. So social proofing, right? Here's the second most important one. It came from empirical evidence. It came from the second study he did. We hope the public record shows that you were a voter again. Now, it turns out that this is appealing to personal accountability. So by subtly reminding someone that, hey, we may check up. We may follow up to see if you've actually followed through. It subtly reminds them, oh shit, I probably should follow through and get that action done. He found that in that study, 300,000 people, N of 300,000, you could increase voter turnout by about 2 to 3%. Okay? So, and then in follow-up studies, he's reframed it to, we may call you to talk about your voting experience. Again, a subtle reminder that we may hold you accountable to what you've said. These are the 2 nudges for your toolkit. We'll write them down. Nudge 1, or nudge 2, implementation intentions, and then accountability. So you can use these tonight to solve the problem. Here's how we used it. This is an emergency room discharge summary. Every patient who I see in the emergency room has to have a discharge summary. Okay? A nurse takes anywhere from 2 minutes to 5 minutes to talk them through this discharge process. Nurses find this absolutely useless. They think it's totally ineffective, and I think they're right, quite frankly. What we want to do is we want to take that implementation intervention and that personal accountability intervention and infuse it into that discharge process, specifically for the behavioral outcome of getting people to go to the pharmacy. Right? So, when will you go to the pharmacy? What will you be doing before you go to the pharmacy? How will you get to the pharmacy? Oh, and by the way, we may call you to talk about your experience filling out your prescription. So we hope that by infusing this vector, is how we call it, which is a piece of paper that's already there. We're not adding extra to the discharge process. We're putting on these experimentally validated interventions onto something that's pre-existing. We hope that we can increase the amount of people who follow up and get their prescriptions.
Okay, but tonight is not about us. Tonight is about you and the beginning of your journey, applying nudges to problems you care a lot about. So we built tonight to be a workshop for everyone to think about the nudges we've already talked about and a few more we're going to talk about. A workshop addressing the problem that is written on the memo on your table. So if everyone right now can spend about 3 minutes reading through their memo and thinking and just beginning to think about how could some of the nudges we've talked about, some of the nudges you know just from outside of this evening, apply to this. And then we're going to dig back into a couple more nudges.
Are we going to move from a 4 table to the 2 table?
Yeah, that would be great. Does someone?
We have actually.
Oh, you're on both. Okay.
Wait, hold on.
That's
Taylor,
the agenda now.
Taylor, can you move to it? Because we need a doc here. Are you guys going to docs?
Yeah.
We just want to have one doc or one public health practitioner at every meeting.
Okay, and just 3 minutes here.
Is that a safety precaution now?
By far.
He is a doctor to be.
How
about the one who delivered Claire?
She's pretty
Mr. Mike.
She actually did something that all of you got. She put us at ease in a way that they don't teach your members. No, did you ask? No, it's not mine. It's yours.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
About a minute and a half left. Nice. Okay, 10 more seconds.
Nudge.
Okay, now that everyone's read your memos, we're going to dive into 4 more behavioral insights that we think can arm you to attack the problem when we break into our individual nudge units and spend time thinking about different ways that behavioral insights and nudges can be used to attack these problems. And if there's any confusion with the terms that we're using, I know we go from behavioral insight to nudge. I wrote my definition of them up there. This does not mean they're necessarily true, but that's the way I interpret these things. Okay, so this is my favorite example of a nudge. After hearing about this study, I really, truly got hooked on nudging, and I'm now applying to PhD programs in hope of spending the majority of my career doing nudging stuff. So this study occurred when a few academics put these signs on people's homes and did 2 things. They asked people which sign they think would lead them to reduce their energy consumption, and then they actually tested which piece of information actually led people to reduce their energy consumption. So when you ask people, and when I heard this, I really thought if I knew how much money I could save by reducing my energy consumption, that would lead me to change my behavior. Maybe something about the environment would, but just those two signs would influence me. But what the finding was that only the fourth sign changes behavior. Knowledge of what the social norm in your neighborhood is has a tremendous impact on people's behavior. And so this sign, they only put it on people's door when it's true, so they weren't lying to people. But the reason I love this study is not because it's a special way or a unique finding in how to change people's energy usage. It's because of what a couple people did after reading this report. So in 2007, I think it was, two people started a company called O-Power, which produces one very simple product based on this study. They send people an energy report, people who they partner with, energy companies who they partner with, that shows you your energy consumption and tells you the truth what your energy consumption is, how it compares to your neighbors, and how it compares to your efficient neighbors. And the finding was that this led people to massively reduce their energy consumption by a couple percent across the board, which is a huge deal if we think that telling people how much money they can save doesn't lead them to change their behavior, but just this little bit of information does. And so now O-Power is a publicly traded company with a market capitalization of over $450 million, simply by providing this one little bit of information. And so those are social norms. Think about how can social norms be applied to the problem you are asked to address tonight. So this is the second example I'm going to cover, is probably, or arguably, the most famous example in the entire field of nudging. And so we can generalize organ donation schemes into two types. One type where there's explicit consent, like in the United Kingdom or Denmark, where you are not an organ donor unless you fill out paperwork and declare that you want to become an organ donor upon your death. And then there's the presumed consent countries where it's the opposite. You are automatically listed as an organ, to become an organ donor upon your death, unless you fill out paperwork and choose the opposite. And so what I thought is most interesting about this is when you pull people across these countries from Denmark to the United Kingdom, the explicit consent countries, or these other countries with presumed consent, they basically have the same preferences. About the same percent of people want to become organ donors upon their death. But the organ donation scheme led to a difference in the actual rates. Does anyone have any guess what the likelihood of being an organ donor is in the presumed consent country? Anyone who hasn't seen this study?
Higher than, I don't know, pretty high, 80%?
80%? Any other guess? Double.
Nope.
Double of 80%?
Yeah, double.
That would be a lot.
Yeah.
Like if you're asked to opt
So
out,
99.9% in most of these countries, which I think, what's that? So if I remember right, the Sweden thing, according to Max, is that people in these countries, families are given an extra opportunity after their family member dies to take them off the list. Is that correct?
Yeah.
To override. But so we see there's a massive difference in public health outcome here, just based on a subtle change in the organ donation scheme. And what really excites me about this is that making this subtle change, you have the government work a lot more in line, or the government's efforts become a lot more in line with the actual desires of its citizens. And it's estimated that if the United States adopted a presumed consent across the board, we would save 5,000 lives a year just from people who die because they can't get access to an organ. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you already said this, but is this actual behavior, or is this people not really knowing that it's going to happen? Like, does that make sense? Are people aware that their loved ones and then themselves are organ donors, or are they not really thinking about it, and then when they're dead they become organ donors? Does that make sense?
In these countries?
In presumed consent, yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a group of people who are like that, but my understanding is that the percentage of people who do desire to be organ donors is far above 90%. Do you know what that number is, Max?
So one of you two mentioned it yesterday, that if you elicit preferences, 90% believe, and if you move it to sort of forced choice, that you can't get your driver's license without saying yes or no, the numbers end up being in the middle, but they're dramatically higher than on the left. But one of the things that you're highlighting is part of this is due to people are lazy. They don't do things.
That's what I'm, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the answer is, the fact that people don't do things is part of what's going on here.
So maybe in this system, you have 5% of people get an outcome they don't want because they're lazy and don't change it. But in this system, you have something like 75% of people don't get the outcome they want because they're too lazy to go fill out the paperwork. So this is another behavioral insight and potential nudge we recommend you consider applying to the problem you've been presented with today.
So to sort of do a 40,000 foot check and take a step back for a second, we're adding to our nudge toolkit so far, and we've talked about 5 different tools you can use to solve the problems you guys are facing. Feel free to take notes and start brainstorming amongst yourself while we're talking, and if any connections are made, that's great. You'll be on your way to when you guys do this together as a group. Okay. This third behavioral insight, this is one of my favorite findings in behavioral science. You have here sagittal MRIs of the brain. Okay? Now, for the docs in the room and the dentists in the room, this is something you guys know well, right? From neurobiology. I know you remember everything from neuroanatomy. On the left side of the screen, an individual was prompted to think of himself. And we see most activity in the rostral anterior cingulate cortex and in the mesial prefrontal cortex. Those are the 2 areas that control our self-identity. When we think of ourselves, those areas light up. On the right of the screen, you see an individual who is the same person who is then asked to think of a different person, someone they've never met, a complete stranger. What you see here is you don't see the same level, anywhere near the same level of rostral and anterior cingulate cortex activation, nor mesial prefrontal cortex. That makes sense, right? You're not thinking about yourself here, so those areas shouldn't light up. No surprises here. Now, there's one more picture here. Who can guess what this individual was prompted to think about in this last image?
Policy.
What was that?
Joke, policy.
Policy. It's a politician, surprise! No activity! Wow! That was fantastic. Bam! That was fantastic. I'm so impressed. So basically, what we see here is that the individual who's thinking about his future self has almost no activity in that same area that is the identity and the self portions of the brain. The mesial prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex are both relatively quiet. In fact, it's more like, when you think of yourself in the future, 30 or 40 years from now, it's more like thinking of a complete stranger. So now, what's the behavioral insight here? Why are we making a fuss about this? People may fail to sufficiently identify with their future selves. Let's unpack that a little bit, make it a little easier to understand. Present Rob, his wants, needs, and desires sometimes supersede the wants, needs, and desires of the future Rob. Right? Now I know within this group here, I know this may not apply to the same extent because a lot of us have been thinking of our future selves for such a long time. And you guys may not have the same level of difficulty with this. But the bottom line is this is an example that is pervasive throughout society. One way it's exercised is that many people will fail to save what they need for retirement. Because how do I know what that 40-year-old, that person who is Alister in 40 years, how do I know what he's going to want and need? So it's hard to emotionally connect. What's the nudge here? Priming the future self. Now, if you're like me, the first time I heard that, I was like, what does that mean? Right? Well, here's what that means. Taking present Rob and emotionally bridging it to future Rob. Creating an emotional connection that's salient, that reminds present Rob that he will one day be future Rob. Okay? Now, here's a study that actually did that. They took a bunch of college students, right, and they gave them $1,000. And they gave them a hypothetical savings account. They said, how much money would you like to save? The control group, they just asked that question point blank. How much money would you like to save? $80 is what the average was of $1,000, okay? The intervention group, they asked them, how much money would you like to save after they did a specific intervention, okay? They had them sit in front of a computer where they had an age-progressed rendering of themselves. They looked at the computer, and there was a sliding scale underneath the picture of themselves 40 years later. When the individual chose to save only a little bit of money, the sliding scale or the face turned into a frown. When the individual chose to save more money on the sliding scale, it turned into a happier, smiling face. In a way, they were bridging emotionally that person in the present state to their future state. And this is one way to nudge around our present bias. Okay? Now, as Max stated, it's very hard to break down these biases, but nudging is all about nudging ourselves away from those biases or towards them when we need to have them work for us. Okay? So the takeaway here is this is the nudge, future self-priming. Okay? Number 4, here's the next behavioral insight, and this is the one. This is about commitment or consistency. Now, many of you guys know this already, but here's what it's about. When someone expresses support for an idea, right, that person is much more likely to then remain consistent with that prior expression of support by essentially committing to it in a more concrete fashion, by doubling down. Now, why is that? So it gets at this belief that, or at this theory that we look to our past behaviors to rationalize our future beliefs and our current self-identity. So if I've accepted something or agreed to something in the past, I'm much more likely to then change, just alter my self-identity in a minor way to make it sort of align with that past behavior. Okay? And that's all to avoid cognitive dissonance. All right. So you guys know many examples of this: signing petitions, upfront pledges, charitable donations, and the nudge here is essentially pre-commitment. Okay? Now this all is a bunch of $10 words, so we're going to try to break this down with the most famous example that showed this, okay, in science. So the behavioral outcome that these authors wanted to elicit from the participants was accepting this huge, ugly 4-foot by 2-foot yard sign and putting this yard sign up in front of their house. It said this. This is the exact sign: "Be a safe driver." Okay. Now that's what they wanted all of the individuals to eventually do. They split them up to the control group and the intervention group. Right? The only way that they differed was that in the intervention group, 2 weeks before the ask was made for this, they asked them, "Would you like to put up this tiny, almost innocuous, 3-inch by 5-inch window display? The same exact issue: be a safe driver." Okay. So they asked them to stick this in front of their, in the window in front of their house, and then came back 2 weeks later and asked them whether or not they wanted to put this up. And the control group, remember, just straight up asked, "Would you like to put this up?" Pina, what do you think? Would you like to put this up in front of your yard? Yeah? Marty, what do you think?
Well, after Dina said yes, I can't say no.
Social norms? So I personally would not want to put this up. 4-foot by 2-foot thing looks ugly. It's not something I'd want adorning my front yard. Right? And that's what we found here. No surprises. 17% of people said, "Yeah, I'll take that sign." The rest of the people were essentially not interested in having this sign put up in their front yard. Right? So now, what did they find in the intervention group? 76% of those people, same exact question at the same exact time. 76% of those individuals said, "Yes, let me put that up." Now, why is that? Those individuals were asked to put that tiny little sign 2 weeks prior. And something may have happened, the authors theorized, to that person's self-identity. Maybe I'm the kind of person who really cares about safe driving. Maybe this is an issue that I really can get behind. Right? And then when the next opportunity to show their support for that idea came around, they said, "Well, I've got to align myself with my past behaviors," and they accepted the sign. Now, as you guys are already thinking, this can be used in very dangerous ways. And so it's our job as leaders to fix the real problems in society by using these tools. And this is just one of the tools, by using these tools to solve real problems in society. So what's the nudge here for you guys tonight? The nudge is pre-commitment. Okay? So now you guys are going to have 15 minutes to break out into your nudge units. All right? And you're going to basically drill down into your health problem that you guys have been given. Now, each group has one designated authority figure. Okay? That person's going to lead the group into getting to that eventual package of nudges or that pilot intervention that you guys will be creating. That individual will also be the default presenter when you guys get 2 minutes. You'll have 2 minutes to present the nudge suite that you guys have come up with. And if you guys want to change that and have someone else present or present as a group, totally fine. But again, the 2 roles for the DA: lead the group into doing the work of getting this intervention done, and then secondly, to present. Okay? So if you guys can break out now and start sort of working together, and just to draw your attention, every group has on their table a huge white piece of paper. If you guys can flip that up on top, that'll be a common workspace for you guys to sort of ideate and to create amongst yourselves.
Want to reduce the amount
I appreciate it. I'm fine with you. Like, I don't know. I want to be engaged. I was like, ooh, I want to be more prepared. I appreciate it. I was kidding around. I'm more of a hard worker. What about having some
Okay, so we're trying to get people to follow through on their prescription, right? Okay.
So what else?
So preaching, I'm taking, read a little bit about it. We can link it to another regularly. Easiest way to think about that.
That's not a big commitment.
Yeah, it is. Just putting it right next to something else. Doubling down on whether or not you're going to
Big commitment is that you'll come out in support of something and then you have to stick with it. Because you've already kind of...
That's the gesture of doing it. So like taking all of the chocolate out of your house?
So, I think something along the lines of like, if I, for whatever reason, became like someone, like a mentor to others in medicine, I would be less likely to not deliver this to myself.
So where's the health system does
So like, I'm imagining like being a doctor and talking about medicine with this patient and being like, hey, patient, I know you're a really responsible person. How would you feel
bridges from physician to nurse.
maybe help me record this little video about how important lipitor is, and I'm going to share with other patients. Would you do that? And the patient's like, yeah, I will. And then once the patient does that, you can go back with that. You're a spokesperson for taking your medicine. That's what I've been thinking about.
I like that. That's a form of accountability. So
Yeah, it is accountability. And it's free commitment. I think you might have done free commitment. Free commitment is the lawn sign.
yeah, the lawn sign, like saying that you're in support of something, doing something that's saying I'm in support of something before you follow through.
Yeah.
Sorry, which part?
Yeah.
So this third paragraph.
So patients serve as patient liaisons. I like that.
Yeah. Are you taking the
If you have that role, like you're like a leader, right? You can't back down.
Yeah. That's good. How about like a form of accountability at the counter?
I think the pharmacist said, okay, I'm going to call you.
So my regular techniques, which we talked about in terms of accountability, so it's a nurse calling, which also works in certain companies do lead more like a So that's
How about a pricing
salience as well, because like teens do its exam every day. It's
Oh, that's interesting. Is that a behavior? That's not one of the ones they went over. I'm sure it's real.
Yeah, but whatever. I mean, that's how they get people.
All different colors, running.
Yeah, I mean that's the real solution here. Pharmacies in clinics, pharmacies across the hallway. Yeah, that's the real solution here.
So I mean, we should talk about all of this without talking about the after.
So one
Like,
thing
I mean, just because it's
have
more general, but to get points,
like
like maybe there's like a more
and another thing maybe just have like but I guess that's so expensive. But like you have a person from pharmacy asking people when they're exiting the hospital.
What prescriptions do you have
Yeah, do
today?
you have some prescriptions to go, you know, like so to take kind of knowledge.
they're not gonna be grossed out by
That's expensive.
Yeah, I guess it's
So no, it's still.
I would be like, I don't know, accessible, but you know, long, it's not to get out the door and then have to go out. Like, it's in front of you.
So how about when you're buying something like a pharmacy? So like if you're going to CVS and you're buying something at the pharmacy, when you check out, the person at the counter asks,
But they ask
do you need to fill? Do you need to fill any orders? No, the person who's like taking your card, your credit card, they ask you, do you need to fill any prescriptions? Simple, cheap. Not
But they're already in the city. I mean, that's too far downstream.
okay. But it's paying off free though.
It is free.
educating people and bringing them into this, so they like get their husbands
and that's maybe so many, so much medicine. Like, I'm not going to make ever in my life. Like I there, I say, like, oh I have pain in my knee. No problem. Wait, you don't take it serious, so take this. Why? Well, use pain.
I know, but our memo is a very narrow population. It's diabetes and hypertension. That's it. So, but I hear you. I agree.
I was like,
okay. Social norms. How do we stigmatize not taking your medication? Let's make it so shameful to not take your medication. So maybe an equivalent sign of the saving energy thing. So a sign in the clinic that says something percent of patients here take your medication, like fill out their prescriptions within an hour of leaving the clinic.
So the problem with that one, we were just talking about this with with hotel towels.
Yeah.
You know how people like put towels.
Yeah, I always say
the towel up,
I always think
or like them on the floor, you know?
Yeah.
Is it only like 44% towels?
Really?
So
Why?
when you tell somebody that hey, 44% of your fellow hotel stayers, it's like
And I can't lie.
it's when it's like 80%, 20%. That's no.
That is the word.
how to carry on.
And we can't lie when you lie.
It goes back to gamification, maybe.
Put it on here, why not?
Same day as the person. How do you know your wife and your husband?
But I was just thinking, I'm joking. More like if we follow something stop playing as a partner.
Took your blood pressure. They measured that meeting your blood sugar level.
No, this will take us through more reminders. Like,
Is that right? No, I mean, is this like exactly what it is?
We wanted 5 minutes on sometime.
Okay.
Sorry, we're working. We get a lot of
So I was thinking about taking people. So like maybe people tell either the doctor or somebody, like a campaign, like who's relying on me.
I feel like that's done.
If you want to know about
We could try that. So let's practice shaming. The social norms one, and then
Yeah, so first
No, it's first coming from the doctor.
you want to go about it,
you know what? That's also part of future self-priming. So we can do some sort of thing where like you can see what you're gonna look like if you don't take your meds, what's gonna happen to you. Versus if you do take your meds, so bridging that.
when are you gonna do that? When you go in the doctor's office.
It's the one that, it's the interview. It's like saying, I will do it. Here's how I will.
That's long. It takes a while.
Yeah.
In the waiting room. I almost think it should be the actual. You smile and take a picture, and then they do the aging thing. Like I think it needs to be more than telling, because doctors telling patients stuff. Like that's the bread and butter. We're trying to change that. I'm always telling people to do shit they don't do it. I'm never doing what my doctor tells me to do. But something like I feel like it's really effective in sexual health. Like when I was in the consequences of like practicing made really real to me, that I'm like, okay. And like that happens in different ways, but something like their whole like
they really care about their health. So if you manage to make them be afraid, they're really
yeah. So these chronic conditions, it's hard to make people afraid because it's like long term. So we have to make it.
if you have diabetes, maybe doctors should only tell you how long you live if you don't take you don't have to take it for like 1 year.
Cool. Yeah, but who's gonna say like where is that?
Where is it? That's already done.
What was the issue?
No, I didn't want the physician. I was.
I like more pre-existing
Than the scaring people.
It's tricky. Not scaring.
It's like the deep. We want to. How about we want to make it?
How we can make physicians care more about cost.
similar stuff, your pressure,
That's why, like, when you treat something like a chlamydia, for example, there's two options.
You are yeah, awesome. Okay, so here's your new first. $3 and then the veteran is whatever, however you want to do it.
We gave them the first dosage right there. Patients. Yeah, we just wasn't changing anything. No, but for diabetes and hypertension, from now on, doctors are going to have those meds in the office. They'll watch you the first one. It's not that expensive. I don't think she. So nice making the patient. Really? You do the first one with your doctor. You don't think you're like going to go to the pharmacy? Maybe it's like not as bad as you thought, or
Morning will be good. Are we on fire?
No.
That's not the timer.
So we set the building on fire last time? No, it's not.
Okay. Look, we saw some tremendous leadership in the
How many patients you prescribed it to?
nobody died.
Yeah, and it's new.
It's on fire? It's on fire. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. We're all going to regroup and present interventions you all came up with. Okay. Can everyone gather back up? Note Unit 1, you all are going to present first. You all are going to be on second.
So yeah, guys, if you can, try to put the backbone or the outline of what you guys have come up with on that white piece of paper. And then what you'll do is you'll take it right over here to where that nudges go here sign is, and just stick it up right there. And feel free to use that as a place to present, or I can just hold it up for you. You guys can just stick it onto me. Okay?
And each group is going to get 2 minutes. We're going to stick to this because we want you all to be able to make the bunkers.
All right, so nudge
over, right over there. If you can place it over there.
All right, so before we begin with this, can we just all sort of level set on what the two problems were the two groups were trying to solve? So who was trying to solve problem 1 from the Surgeon General about compliance? This group. Excellent. All right. So who from this group can give us an outline, not necessarily the whole thing, but just an outline of what the problem was that we were trying to solve with that group? Yes.
So our issue was medication non-compliance. Over 50% of people are not appropriately taking their medications after they're being prescribed, which results in a lot of mortality, morbidity issues, as well as huge cost issues as well.
That's very well said, Gideon. So basically the situation here is that we've segmented out those of the population who don't have access to pharmaceuticals, because that's a problem too. And we've segmented out the part of the population that has low health literacy. So we're really just focused on the group that has the high health literacy and has access, but still for whatever reason is not able to make it. So Nudge Unit 1, what'd you guys come up with?
Okay, we focused on 3 things in the Nudge toolkit. The first was the accountability tool, which, so I can't remember what example was given, but we kind of thought about how, it relates to pre-commitment. So we thought about how a doctor is explaining the importance of medication to a patient and says, hey, patient, you're really responsible. Do you want to sort of become a spokesperson to all the patients in this clinic and maybe like film a little video with me and say, my name is such and such, and I take Lipitor, or whatever it may be. Good stuff. And so you become a sort of semi-public spokesperson for taking that medication. And therefore that's sort of the pre-commitment, you know, you have a bumper sticker, so now you gotta get the big ugly sleep. So you gotta do it. And then, so then we kind of put that thought then that as being like a patient liaison. You can ask a patient if they want to be a patient liaison. 2 is the salience, which we think is probably, that's where a lot of the money is. If patients don't have to travel to the pharmacy, if it is right there in the clinic, and if it becomes, again, the default. So before you leave, you are asked, you're not even asked, you're like, okay, the pharmacy's right there, and you can't leave until you've filled your prescriptions, the percentage that you do have prescriptions. 3, lastly, is making it a social norm to take it, and we took 2 routes for this. So 1, we were thinking some sort of signs in the clinic that are similar to the energy signs, where it's something like something percent of patients at this clinic take their meds appropriately or something like that. And the second we thought of was that social responsibility piece, so getting family involved. So trying to make it real for patients that like, do this for your 1-year-old daughter. I did. You know, she needs you. She needs you to be taking your hypertension. So I guess we're not really sure what that fell under, but those are the
kind of a accountability social norm. Yep.
Yeah.
Very, very, very good. Let's give them a round of applause. Let's get nudge unit 2 up there. The part that stands out to me about that is that they're using relatively costless interventions, which is a hallmark of a really good nudge. Right?
Sorry, these aren't very neatly written. This is like Dr.
Well, what do they say?
Oh, don't worry, we'll tell you. So our big areas of focus are going to be on peer pressure. We thought about a couple different ways to do that. One of them is gamification, so actually allowing the patients to have an app. Vilas actually was mentioning a company he knows of that has an app where the patient actually gets that while they're there. They go home, and then they enter in when they take their medication, get points for that, and we could potentially compare those points to other people on similar treatment regimens. So the patients can see, okay, somebody else is scoring more points than me. Everybody loves Candy Crush and all these other app games. Why can't it work for their medication adherence? Additionally, with peer pressure, not just focusing on the patients, but also on the physicians. As a lot of us know, physicians are a very competitive group. If you tell them that their metrics for patient adherence is not as good as somebody else, they're going to freak out and become a gunner and jack up their adherence and really make sure their patients are taking it and do whatever they need. So that's something important to think about. It's not just the patients, but also physician-facing stuff. We also wanted to hit on defaults. I should mention, yeah, those are more like on the accountability, social norms there. I also wanted to hit on defaults. So we thought about, like the last group said, delivering the medications actually before they leave the hospital, so you have them on the way out. It's not something you have to go and get from the pharmacy. That'll cut down on the 50% or whatever it was that aren't even filling that first prescription. And then finally, we're talking about whether it's home health visits, telemedicine, some way that the providers can check in with the patient, showing up. And the ideal version would be where they actually are going out there and taking blood pressure or measuring their blood sugar levels so we can see whether or not they're taking their medications. And instead of just measuring whether or not they're picking them up, actually measure the outcomes we're looking at, which is the blood sugar levels, the blood pressure, the things that these medications affect. And that would really hit home with the accountability, also the salience, kind of keeping this relevant for the patients, pre-commitment, in the sense that they are obligating themselves to do this before they leave the hospital. So those were our thoughts.
That's fantastic. Especially hitting on that social norm within the physician community. If your group of patients are only X percentage here as compared to the colleagues that you have, that would be fantastic.
I hate your alarm.
I hate it too. I'm not going to put that on.
Okay, so we're the last group talking about that problem, and we kind of bucketed the issue into 2 different problems. So one is, how do you ensure that patients pick up the meds that you're prescribing, and then 2, particularly for conditions like hypertension and diabetes, which were the 2 listed in the prompt, how do you ensure that people take these medications like 30 years after you first gave them to them? So in terms of picking up meds, the major things we talked about or major nudges were accountability and defaults. So one is like before they leave, say, we're going to call you and see how your new medication is going. And then defaults, so things like e-prescriptions, which already exist for a lot of medications, or potentially mailing medications to people who you think may have a particularly difficult time actually picking up their medications, even if they can afford them. People like elders. And then again with the accountability, so having follow-up calls like nurses in the primary care doc's office saying, how's your new medication going? Were you able to pick it up? Are you having side effects? Just make sure that they're feeling like, yes, I am taking the medication. If they're not, they're going to feel bad, I think probably because they just got the call. And then the second one is how do you have people keep taking medications, particularly for asymptomatic conditions. So we sort of focus in on salience and accountability. So if you can give people mailers to help them, remind them why they're taking their medications. This example sounds like a little threatening or pseudo-threatening, which I don't like, but something like, congratulations on taking your blood pressure meds, like you're preventing strokes, which means you're going to be around to like take care of your grandchildren and play with them and stuff like that. But like something to get the point of like, why do I take medication every day if I don't feel any different when I don't take it? So that's accountability and also salience and I guess priming your future self to like want to be there.
Alister was a particularly good example of putting a bunch of different nudges together, all to sort of try to solve the same problem. So for the second big challenge that this side of the room tried to solve, can someone from this side tell us a little bit about what that problem was about?
It was about doctors overprescribing antibiotics. 95% of doctors say they prescribe antibiotics sometimes even though they know it's not needed. And so as a result, there are like 6 times the amount of antibiotics prescribed as are actually needed by the patient. This leads to antibiotic or microbial resistance, which then leads to infections that can eat your flesh and kill you and so on and so forth. They cannot be cured by the antibiotics we have today, so it's a heavily morbid and mortal problem.
Fantastic. So now, who can we have from this side? Which group is nudge unit 4?
We're 6.
4. Oh. 4? All right. You guys want to get up there?
I'll get up there. I think I wrote out the wrong side. But essentially we have a four-pronged approach to this issue. First, we want to institute a 5-minute online tutorial for all physicians practicing. We want to present data regarding great doctor antibiotic use in order to get them to understand that the status quo for great doctors is to be careful with antibiotics. Remind them of the excellent reputation of the hospital they work in. And then we also want to institute a pay schedule where we give them $200 a month in order to follow the schedule. And if they are in the 25th percentile of doctors prescribing antibiotics, they lose $100. And if it's 10th percentile, then they lose $200. So that's loss aversion. And they have to sign the agreement to comply, which gets them to commit. Once they do this, we're going to have an antibiotic order in the EMR that essentially will get them to default not to prescribe antibiotics. You can't just like click sore throat and then have antibiotics be in your order. You have to actually go into the system and click it. And then what's most interesting to me, I think this is my original idea, is that is that we want to have, every time someone prescribes antibiotics, we want to have a picture of a MRSA infection. And these are doctors here, they're numb to this. They see that all the time, see it in textbooks, but it won't remind them of the consequences of overprescribing antibiotics. Third, we want to create a script for sore throat recommendation, just so when someone comes in with a sore throat, they want to leave with something, we can give them something. And then finally, we want to send them notice every week of their performance and give a smile and a frown with their face regarding their performance in the EMR.
That's so
wow.
That's so real.
That was impressive.
That's so bad.
What's that, like automatic?
Hot water.
Alright, you guys moved to 5. That was
just hot water.
Wow. Hot water and salt.
Stop the alarm before it starts.
You will notice some common themes on here. We really want to have baseline data on the facility where we're working. I think doctors really care about data, and we want to know actually how many people in this community are coming in with sore throat and not having strep, because we want this data to be very applicable to the place where we're intervening. With that data, we would like to produce physician report cards. So we want physicians to know how accurate they are and how they compare to their peers. I think that'll help with accountability if they know that they're going to be followed up on their strep throat accuracy. And we think that the social norms will help pressure them to decrease prescriptions. We also want to use EMR pop-ups. So we talked about different ones that might work, and this is mostly about salience, about making the issue, kind of drawing attention to the issue. So we talked about a number of people that will die in the future from super infections. We talked about the cost of antibiotics for the patients. We talked about having accuracy pop-ups, the same accuracy that went into the report cards, popping up each time someone tries to prescribe antibiotics. And we also talked about having a question in that pop-up, so they can't just click OK or continue. They have to enter, for example, if the question were, how likely do you think it is that this person has strep throat? They have to actually enter that number. And it's not necessarily that the number will be gated, but just forcing that extra activity makes them engage in the question more seriously. We also did want to put up some signs, especially utilizing the social norms principle. So we wanted to have a sign that talked about your colleagues are doing well by reducing prescriptions in this way, or having a tracker of accuracy throughout the emergency room or the clinic. And we also wanted to have a sign in a patient room that says only 10% of people with a sore throat have strep throat. We want to put that in the patient room because we think that patients and doctors can work together on this question, and if patients are reassured that they don't need antibiotics, we think there will be less pressure on the physician to prescribe them.
So good. All right. All right, Anthony.
Yes. So the teacher in me outweighs the doctor in my future, so hopefully y'all can read it. Nudge number one is actually something that we phrased as defaults, but basically the main principle is we make it more cumbersome to prescribe antibiotics. There are a few things that doctors hate more than wasting time, taking a lot of time, and with EHRs coming into more prominent use, if you're adding steps, then instead of just giving that patient the Z-Pack that you know they probably don't need, you might actually take that time instead to have a conversation with the patient about why you don't need this antibiotic. Number two, we talked about social norms. So again, in similar vein to what you've already heard, providing physicians with data comparing their prescribing behavior to that of their peers. We wanted to go a step further and make this data publicly available. So if you're a patient and you see that your doctor is prescribing this amount versus the doctor over here who's prescribing less, and patient outcomes are the same, or furthermore, sort of opportunistic infections and antibiotic resistance is improved with that other doctor, then you might go to that other doctor, and then your doctor might change your behavior as a result. Number three sort of fell somewhere within implementation intentions and pre-commitment. So you've heard about signs and you heard about pop-ups, and what we just call this is a campaign for responsible prescribing. And we left it that broad because we wanted to include media. We want, screensavers when your computer has been idle for 5 minutes, it can pop up and go across the screen. When you're walking in the hospital and there are plasma TVs in the lobbies down, wherever you are, we're going to remind you. And we want to include families of providers in this campaign. So basically, your little 10-year-old daughter is going to be on the screen, be like, my dad prescribed responsibly.
So, 4 quick comments, because I know you want to get out of here soon. One, heard lots of good ideas, so Alister was reacting to the specifics, but there are lots of good ideas. And it's kind of stunning, there are kind of 9 of you working on each of the 2 problems in groups of 3, and we now have a kind of an amazing array of good ideas to think about. So I think that that suggests that, one, you have a bunch of smart colleagues, but there's an opportunity to use your fellowship experience by using your colleagues, not just for nudges, but to help brainstorm lots of different problems. And that's certainly an opportunity. Now, everybody wants to know which of the nudges was best. Okay? And the answer is I have no idea. Okay? And that highlights sort of another aspect of the nudge movement, which we really haven't talked about tonight, and that is testing. Okay? So if we're going to implement this, these ideas on 1 million docs, and we have a half a dozen ideas that we think are the best, why not try them on samples of 1,000 docs so we can find out what works before we roll it out to a large number of people. And so testing is a sort of another significant part of this whole behavioral insights world. My last comment is you probably noticed we really covered a tremendous amount this evening. I did history quickly, but we kind of got an overview of 7 different nudges, and then you went through a quite sophisticated experiential exercise. And to a dramatic degree, it's because these 2 guys were like enormously organized with the teaching plan, and they had thought through things at a level that had shocking precision, both on content, process, and how to create a great experience for you. So Robert and Alister, thank you. Any closing comment?
Well, first we'd like to open it up to people here. We have about 10 more minutes left just to hear any of your thoughts on what you learned tonight or what is striking.
Are there, I mean, there seemed to be like an international bent to this behavioral insights work. Is there like have you noticed cultural differences in some of the biases or some of the nudges that are effective or ineffective?
Yeah, enormous cultural bias, and the U.S. Republicans don't like them. Is that what you meant by culture? So more seriously, it's going to sound like I'm saying the same thing again, but the far left and the far right are both skeptical for different reasons. Okay, so one is worried about the nanny state, and the other one is worried about who does the nudging. Okay, so you have those critiques, and that creates barriers, and the media becomes very important. But at the same time, the UK nudge unit was attacked by the media to a dramatic degree, and the fact that they so quickly hit with the big win, said here's your $100 million, that got rid of the cost concerns to a significant degree. So a lot of people claim that part of the key to David Halpern's success is that he is a good scientist, but he also really understood government well. He was also a Tony Blair guy, who then when Cameron took office, Cameron brought him in to do it. So it seems somewhat less political with having a Tony Blair guy coming into the Cameron government to do it. Halpern thinks that it's easier for a right-leaning government to nudge than a left-leaning government. That there's more resistance from the right to the left nudging, but that doesn't necessarily have to be true. So, so if you look, I won't go into detail, but if you ask who's the most critical person in the HKS environment about nudging, it would be Marshall Gans, and his criticisms come from a more leftist concern about he doesn't want Cheney being in charge of his nudges.
Yeah, thank you.
Kind of along this similar line, I'm curious, how do you navigate a lot of the ethical considerations with what it means to nudge populations that are extraordinarily vulnerable and that could be certainly nudged in the a less correct, but also just nudged in general.
It's easiest to answer in reality. So my politics are kind of Obama, Bill Bradley left. Okay. And so do I want Jamie doing my nudging? No. Okay. But that doesn't come close to leading me to think I don't want us to develop this as part of a leadership toolkit. I mean, Cheney also uses arithmetic, but that doesn't mean that I'm against teaching arithmetic and teaching it correctly. So I think we want to have the best things in the toolkit, and the fact that any good tool can be used for good or bad is something that we want to think about. Okay, but we always have a default. question is whether we have a wise one. You're looking like I'm not even answering your question.
My question is, what are the questions that we should be asking ourselves when we're thinking about a nudge to implement to make sure that we're asking ourselves if we were to implement a policy or think about a test, whether or not this is ethical or the right thing to do depending on our population? Just from an implementation perspective. Big question.
Yeah, I can think of some warning signs. I mean, so one, do you have a conflict of interest? Do you make money out of one particular nudge? I mean, you probably shouldn't be involved in implementing something where you have a clear financial conflict of interest. It's hard not to have a conflict of interest in terms of belief in your own ideas. But certainly a financial conflict of interest should set off warning bells, but I don't think that people with a conflict of interest should be in regulatory functions, but they are on a quite regular basis. So again, that's the concern. Most of the nudges that almost each of these countries that I put up earlier is starting with are reasonably apolitical. I mean, again, I think people on the far end, on either far end, could sort of deconstruct how they are in fact quite political. But I think most people would say that getting kids to show up for school, getting people to save for retirement, getting people to take their prescriptions, getting people to pay their taxes, reasonably apolitical. And I think that that's a great place for a nudge unit to start. One government showed up in this room right after the Behavioral Insights group got started, and so Abby, you'll learn that Abby Dalton kind of runs the Behavioral Insights group, and she set up a meeting, and I showed up and wasn't sure what I'd shown up for. And there's an agency of a government, I'll skip the government's name, but the question was, how do we increase the birth rate of people who are native to our country and would rather not increase the birth rate of people in our country who aren't native? And that really wasn't one that I wanted to work on, and it might even be technically genocide. But you know, so that could come out, and so I just kind of pleasantly got out of the room. Yeah.
Last question.
I think you guys are terrific. Like I think
agree.
You're absolutely wonderful. You do much, but of course.
I got it.
But really, I'm very impressed with how you took us through this exercise. Very experiential as well. I'm wondering how related is the effectiveness of nudging with the emotional side of people. Yeah, that's my question.
She just finished first module of guns, so.
I'll tell you one interesting episode that I think that Alister and Robert were there for, but Cass Sunstein, David Leibson, Mike Norton, Bridget Terry Long were on a panel. It was a Behavioral Insights, I think you organized it, it was a Behavioral Insights study group panel. And somebody asked from the audience, somebody with considerable expertise, they basically said, this is an interesting session, but what makes you think that this has anything to do with leadership? Because you're skipping the minds and hearts, and leadership is all about changing people's minds and hearts. And Cass Sunstein just said, I'm confused by the question. If a leader can dramatically change behavior in a positive direction, and you're skipping the minds and hearts, would you want the leader to not have access to that set of tools? And David Leibson said, in the realm of getting people to save for retirement, nudges, skipping minds and hearts, are at least 10 times as effective as any intervention that goes through the mind or the heart. And so that's not meant to be a statement against cognition or emotion, but it's saying that I think that we want leaders to be trained with all the most effective tools that they can have access to that have to do with the mind, the heart, and how to change choice architecture for contexts where people aren't going to engage either of those. Did I not answer your question?
Yes, I mean, I hope that the leaders are ethical enough to take into account those two aspects and not only the tool itself. That's the
so far, the record
downside,
looks
no?
pretty good, despite the childbirth.
Okay, so I know some people in here have spent a lot of time thinking about nudging before this, but can you raise your hand if this was the first time you ever spent 2 straight hours thinking about nudging and behavioral insights? Okay, that is awesome. Our goal for everyone here tonight was to begin your journey applying nudges to the problems you care most about. And like we said at the beginning, tonight was not about applying nudging to medicine. It was simply a workshop. Our question for you now is, Christina, how can you apply nudges to your work in economic justice? Or where's Sarah at? Sarah, how can you apply nudges to your work in energy policy? And so that's what we hope tonight was just the beginning of. So we have a few calls to action. The first is to join the Behavioral Insights Study Group. Wherever you see this sticker, there's something going on with nudges there. The second?
The second is to join us if you're interested in this intersection between behavioral science and solving real problems in medicine. We're basically in the process of creating collaboration, a partnership between MGH and between those who are interested at HKS and HBS in nudging and in behavioral science. So the last is let's continue the conversation on the boat, in the forum,
Are you coming?
everywhere. I will be coming, yes. And in CPL, and we hope that these tools that you guys have used tonight will be part of your leadership toolkit that you can walk around with now to solve the issues that you care most deeply about. Okay? Thank you guys so much. 8 o'clock, we're done.
Alister, Robert, and Max so much. This was really excellent. And one thing I wanted to mention, some of the fellows last night did a very brief...
And it was earlier in September than it was this year. And so we're at the Ocean Edge Hotel, and on Friday night, there's a dinner reception, as you experienced. And after dinner, people the bar's open and people are having a drink or two. And Elsa from Hong Kong comes up to me. And Elsa is a forceful personality. And she walks up to me and she says, "So Max, are you drunk?" And I said, "No, Elsa, why do you ask?" She said, "You have a car?" I said, "Yep, I have a car." She said, "Thought so." She said, "So we have a problem here. There's a bunch of adults who are kind of stuck in the middle of Cape Cod, and we have no access to stuff that we want for entertaining ourselves this evening. So would you drive us down the road and then drive us back?" I said, "I can do this, Elsa." So the next thing I know is I get my car, and 5 fellows pile in, and that includes these 2 gentlemen. And we drive down the road, and I park the car, they go in, and this is alcohol wine like I've never seen before. The quantity and the low quality were and I drove the 5 of them and the very full back of the car, dropped them off, and they invited me in, and they said, "Oh, thank you, good night." And I went to sleep. This year, it seemed like people thought that there was an 82-year-old tradition that I had a liquor run. And what I want to do is convey it to these guys. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alister.
Thank you guys. We want to be concise, and we want to give you guys tools for tonight to help you with your leadership journeys. We want to introduce you to behavioral insights, and most importantly, we want to get you on the boat cruise by 8 p.m. Okay, so we're gonna move through things today. All right. So as Max alluded to, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be back. Right. This fellowship for me in the 2 years that I was here through a very difficult time in my life, and this place, people like Max, people like Patty, people like Rob, Barbara, really held me through a very difficult set of circumstances in my life, and I came out stronger on the other end. And when I graduated, I feel like I graduated left with the wind at my back. And that will happen for all of you as well. You really leave this place feeling like you have the wind at your back. And you must remember that it's the relationships and it's the interactions that you have with each other. It's the real source of value and the real source of power in this fellowship. So today we want to begin a conversation about nudging, about behavioral insights. As Max alluded to, behavioral insights have been used the world over to solve problems in politics, in marketing and consumer behavior, in savings and financial loan decisions. And they've been effective, and these nudges, these interventions have been well validated and have been experimentally sound. The question, though, that Rob and I are trying to answer is, can behavioral insights be used in medicine? Can behavioral insights be used to help doctors make better decisions? Can behavioral insights be used to help patients make better decisions? Can nudging work to keep a patient more sort of compliant with their exercise goals, with their dieting goals and regimens? Ultimately, we want to ask, will nudges work in medicine? Now, this is unclaimed territory so far. There have only been a couple of
chance that something is going to there's no percentage chance. All of you who invested in Fortitude, you lost all your clients' money. That was $48 Ponzi scheme. And what's intriguing is that when I show this to any audience, and that includes high-level people in the investment banking world, Fortitude's a runaway winner. Okay? The other interesting thing is, despite the fact that Fortitude's a runaway winner, when I ask the next question, what's wrong with one of these funds, there are people in the audience who are, there are more of you thinking it, a couple of you saying, Fortitude's not possible. Basically, a little bit of economics provides information to make the argument that it's totally impossible to dramatically outperform the market with no volatility. Okay. Now, we'll skip all the details for why that's the case because I only have 3 minutes. And some of you are going to say, but how was I supposed to know? What I want to emphasize is, even with investment banking executives, even with people with MBAs, PhDs in relevant areas, when you ask what do you invest in, people look for high returns, low volatility. And their mind fades from the ethical question of is this possible or not. All right. So we kind of wandered onto this problem. And what I want to highlight is that there are lots of threats and challenges out there, and we often don't notice things that we should notice. Okay. Now, Vilas mentioned Marla. Marla notices everything, and without training, I notice nothing. Okay, I'm a really terrible noticer, so I've been on a 12-year self-recovery improvement effort, including writing a book last year called The Power of Noticing, and the course version of it is in the first week of January. So if you want to learn what I've learned over the last 12 years about how to notice better, come visit. But what I want to emphasize is that what we're going to be spending this evening about is noticing opportunities to fix things that aren't right. Okay? And we're going to be noticing the kinds of things that too often people just say that's the way the world works, that's the way our hospital works, that's the way the government works, when we should be noticing that there's something wrong there and we can go about fixing it. All right, so that's the noticing part. We're kind of done with that. I'm happy, by the way, at 8 o'clock, I have nowhere to go. I'm happy to talk forever about noticing. All right, so the field of behavioral insights, I kind of dated to Herb Simon in the 40s and 50s. A lot of you have heard the phrase bounded rationality. Simon won the Nobel Prize for the very simple idea that humans aren't fully rational like neoclassical economic models suggest, but there are we have a variety of cognitive limitations. And Kahneman and Tversky passed away, that's why many of you know Kahneman more than you know Tversky. But Kahneman and Tversky became the leaders of the field, telling us about the systematic, predictable ways in which humans are limited from acting rationally. So we started to catalog what these mistakes are. And a lot of you have heard about the framing effect and escalation of commitment, overconfidence. You'll be hearing about 7 in today's class. So that will be part of that. And the Robert Alister list will really come out of this tradition of identifying what are the systematic and predictable ways in which humans are limited. All right, now you're not really supposed to read this slide. This is just a prompt for me. But it mentions a paper by... So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and I'm going to introduce my two colleagues, and after that I just kind of sit on the side and chime in the sidelines. And I'll tell you more about them in a few minutes. So first we'll go through a little bit of background on the history of the behavioral insights movement, and it'll be a very, very short history. But before I do that, some of you might have noticed that I'm teaching, in the first full week of January, I teach a J-term course on noticing. So you're going to get a 3-minute preview of that course, because I'm going to use that as a lead-in to what I see the behavioral insights movement being all about. All right. Now, this might seem more appropriate for George Fellows or for Rubinstein Fellows, but you're here, so I'm going to give you a problem anyhow. It looked like a problem you want, but here it is, okay? And it's an investment problem, and you're an investment advisor, and you have a client who wants to invest a moderate chunk of money for a long-term investment, moderate risk preference, and you've narrowed the choices down to 4 funds, and everyone in this room is going to be required to make a recommendation of one of the 4 funds. Now you'll see there's 5 up there, but the blue one is the S&P 500 over the last 9 years. And some of you might even recommend an index fund, but here you can't, because that would be boring, and they came to you for good advice for doing something better than indexing their money. All right. So the 4 funds, the green fund is the tobacco, the letters didn't come out, sorry about that, but the green fund is called Tobacco Trade, primarily invests in tobacco. The rust-colored fund is called Alpha. The purple fund is Fortitude, and the yellow fund is Power Trade. Now I'm sure you'd like to know more before making an important recommendation, but unfortunately I'm not going to tell you anything more. And you only have like about another 35 seconds to think this through. So again, I'll remind you, the blue is not an option, but it's a benchmark. It's the S&P 500. It's the U.S. stock market. Green, Tobacco Trade. Rust, Alpha. Purple, Fortitude. And yellow, Power Trade. Everybody ready? Because voting's coming. Who's bold enough to go with Tobacco Trade in this group with a lot of doctors in the room? Nobody. Okay, how about that Rust colored Alpha fund? Got a couple. 3? Okay. Fortitude? Pretty popular. And Power Trade. All right. So Fortitude won, and a couple of you were shrugging like, how am I supposed to know? But you said I have to vote, so I'll vote. All right. But Fortitude won. Fortitude was a bigger winner last night, I'll tell you. So, but my next question to you is there anything wrong with one of these 4 funds? Yeah.
I think it depends. I think it depends on what's in them, and I think it depends on...
Based on what you can see right in front of you, is there anything wrong with one of these funds? Yeah.
Fortitude has no volatility whatsoever.
That's good, right? High returns, low volatility. Is that what you're saying? What was that?
It's almost impossible.
Almost impossible. Why are you hedging with almost?
Because there may be 1%.
That kicked off in 1982. And what I want to, the main thing I want to emphasize here, now you're all trying to read it, but it's really not that interesting. But what was in this 1982 paper was a fascinating result, because if you go back to the 70s, 80s, even 90s, those of us who were studying this area of systematic and predictable biases, we clearly did this with the general notion, if we can figure out what's wrong with your intuition, we can fix it. And what this 82 paper highlighted was that in fact we're getting pretty good at identifying what are the biases, and we don't have a clue about how to fix your intuition. And 30 years later, that's still the conclusion. We don't know how to fix intuition. We can get a short-term fix in the lab that lasts about a half hour, okay? But in terms of keeping you from being overconfident, telling you about it, that doesn't work. We don't have any training effort that's actually effective on a widespread basis on improving intuition, which is a little sad. Okay? But what Thaler and Sunstein did in their book Nudge was they basically suggested that if at first you don't succeed, try again, then quit, no use being a damn fool about it. And if we can't fix intuition, maybe there's something else we can do. And what they identify is what they describe as libertarian paternalism or choice architecture, or the word we most commonly hear is nudge. And the basic idea of nudge is if we understand how human beings work, then perhaps we can design our choices in ways that will increase the likelihood that people with their systematic and predictable biases will still get better results for themselves and better results for society on a more frequent basis. And this nudge movement is very connected to the Behavioral Insights Group, which you've heard about. You probably have received lots of emails from Kate Phillips and Abby Dalton about various Behavioral Insight Group and Behavioral Insight Study Group events. I'm happy to tell you more again at 8 o'clock if you're not getting those lists. But this went from an academic structure to this guy's David Halpern, who recently wrote a book called Inside the Nudge Unit. That's Owen Service is kind of number 2 within the UK Behavioral Insights team. And the Behavioral Insights team became the practitioner experts on how do you take the nudge framework and turn it into an actual practice to improve government. And they've now run over 200 field experiments on how to make government more effective. Okay? And in a bizarre set of events, last year David Cameron privatized the Behavioral Insight team. So it used to be an agency of government. It's now a for-profit corporation that's 1/3 owned by the British government. But that's kind of a side note. So this occurs in 2010. One of the interesting things that they did, because we have a lot of docs in the room who are working on really important things, the first project that they worked on was how to collect more taxes. Okay? And the reason I tell you something so boring is that it's useful to think about their first study in terms of creating change. So why do taxes first? And the simple answer is, after you collect an extra $100 million, it allows you more discretion to fix education, health, and lots of other things that you think are an easy fix. So a very interesting strategic choice. And I think that I think it was easy pickings. I think that they thought that they were pretty confident that they could get a big success very easily. Okay. The tax letter, okay, was in 2010. And this is what the bit world looks like today. Okay. There are bit units showing up all around the world. None of them are even close to the Behavioral Insight team in the UK in terms of state of development. But we have more than a dozen countries that are developing bit units. We have the World Bank who's involved, the European Union, the OECD, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of activity going on, a lot of consulting firms trying to figure out what role they're going to play in all of this activity. Julia works for BCG. Yes, out of Dubai, and she's very much in this world from the consulting side. So lots of different activity, and the rest of this evening is going to be focused on health in ways that my two colleagues are going to tell you about. So Alister and Robert were both fellows in our programs as of a few months ago, and then they graduated. They're both terrific people. Alister is a doc. He's working in an emergency room currently. Robert is the creator of the Behavioral Insights Study Group. Just a few words on that. Iris Bonet and I, in 2012, were designing something called the Behavioral Insights Group. And the way I ended up as co-director of CPL is I had the idea that perhaps the Behavioral Insights Group should be part of CPL. Somehow that made me a candidate to replace David Gergen, and then David Gergen and I talked, and we liked each other, so we ended up as co-directors. But we started the Behavioral Insights Group in 2013, and it was really in the fall, about 6 months later, that Robert and a few others showed up and said, "What about us?" And we said, "Who?" And the answer was, "What about all the students who are interested in this stuff?" And Iris and I kind of said, "You're interested in this stuff?" So we clearly thought of this as a activity for geeks around here, and found that there was an enormous amount of student interest. And there's now 600 students who are part of the Behavioral Insights Study Group that Robert created, and Kate Phelps is the current lead on that. But the other fun part to tell you about the introduction, which you've already had alluded to. I joined CPL April 1, 2013, and Barbara will remember this. And I was invited to a Wednesday night, okay, and I sort of was just meeting fellows for the first time, and they asked me my opinions on some things, and I told them my opinions. And my quick summary is, and they didn't like my opinions. And that wasn't the best start of connecting to the fellows. It happens. Okay. Does that sound fair, Barbara?
It sounds like you're on.
But it's April already, so then it's May, and then everybody goes away for the summer, right? So then the fall comes, and I've had people not like me before. It's okay. And so the fall comes, and we have the retreat at Cape